To every soul who still believes in justice, what played out at the United Nations this week was nothing short of a diplomatic earthquake. In the marbled chambers of New York, where words often echo without consequence, world leaders broke ranks with the most powerful capital on earth, Washington, and stood shoulder to shoulder with a cause that has been denied, delayed, and derailed for nearly a century: the recognition of Palestine as a sovereign state. It was not just a procedural skirmish, it was defiance, a collective act of defiance against the gravitational pull of American influence and the iron will of Israel. For some, it was overdue justice; for others, reckless symbolism. But one fact is undeniable. In that moment, under the glaring lights of the General Assembly, the global conversation on statehood shifted.
Despair intertwined, which Israelis and Palestinians have gone down, each in their own way. We have walked alongside them, each of us in keeping with our history and our sensibilities. But the truth is that we bear a collective responsibility for, to date, having failed to build just and lasting peace in the Middle East.
To understand the weight of this moment, we must rewind the clock. Palestine's quest for recognition is as old as the conflict itself. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the land into two states, one Jewish, one Arab. Israel was born in 1948, but the Palestinian state never materialized. Wars ensued, refugees scattered, and the dream of sovereignty was suffocated under military occupation, settlement expansion, and the paralysis of international diplomacy. Fast forward to 1988. The Palestine Liberation Organization declared independence in Algiers. Over 130 nations recognized it. Yet at the UN, the United States' veto power and Israel's fierce opposition kept Palestine outside the formal club of states. In 2012, the General Assembly granted Palestine non-member observer state status, an upgrade, but not full recognition. That status allowed Palestinians to join treaties, to bring cases before international courts, and to plant their flag outside UN headquarters. But it was still limbo. And now, after years of failed negotiations, cycles of violence in Gaza, and growing global impatience, the momentum is swinging again. The symbolic wall of resistance is cracking. What we saw this week was the loudest fracture yet. The General Assembly became a theater of competing visions. On one side, leader after leader rose to the podium, applauding the principle of self-determination and the legitimacy of Palestinian aspirations. France's President Emmanuel Macron stunned delegates by formally recognizing Palestine, declaring that peace cannot be built on perpetual denial. Delegates erupted in applause, some even standing. From Latin America, leaders invoked parallels to colonial struggles, describing Palestine as the last unfinished chapter of decolonization.
Of France, Your Excellency Secretary General, Your Excellency President of the General Assembly, distinguished guests, God, peace and blessings be upon you. I have the honor to deliver the statement of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a co-chair of this conference on behalf of His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, Crown Prince and Prime Minister of the Kingdom.
From Africa, voices called for justice and dignity, linking their own liberation histories with the plight of Palestinians. From Asia, countries underscored that stability in the Middle East is impossible without Palestinian statehood. And then there was Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, who delivered perhaps the most morally charged statement of the day. Statehood is not a bargaining chip, it is a right. His words reverberated across the chamber like a verdict.
Opportunity to be fully represented.
What made this moment electrifying wasn't simply the applause or the symbolic words, it was the unmistakable defiance. The United States has, for decades, acted as the immovable pillar in Israel's corner. Its veto in the Security Council has killed every serious attempt at Palestinian statehood. Washington provides billions in military aid, diplomatic cover, and political muscle to shield Israel from international pressure. But this week at the UN, that wall was punctured. When European powers like France, Ireland, and Spain openly recognized Palestine, they weren't just making a moral statement. They were challenging the very architecture of US-Israeli dominance in international diplomacy. Think about it. For years, American presidents, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama to Joe Biden, repeated the same refrain: the two-state solution remains the only viable path. And yet, every concrete step toward that solution was blocked or delayed. The US preached peace, but punished recognition. It spoke of negotiations, but vetoed international measures. Now countries are saying, enough. They are no longer waiting for Washington's permission slip. They are declaring that Palestinian statehood cannot be held hostage to American politics, Israeli coalition governments, or endless cycles of violence in Gaza. For Israel, the moment was infuriating. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government blasted the recognitions as a reward for terror. Israeli diplomats walked out during some speeches. They warned that unilateral recognition would embolden Hamas, undermine Israel's security, and poison any future negotiations. But yet, that outrage revealed a deeper truth. Israel is no longer controlling the narrative inside the UN hall. Its influence is shrinking in spaces where it once commanded silence. The very act of recognition, even if symbolic, strips Israel of the monopoly it has long enjoyed over the diplomatic script. The reverberations of this defiance stretched across the globe. In Europe, the continent showed a split screen. France and Spain led the charge toward recognition, while Germany and Italy hesitated, fearing a rupture in relations with Israel and Washington. Britain, once cautious, shifted toward support, with leaders admitting that indefinite occupation is morally indefensible. The EU as a bloc remained divided, but the fracture lines themselves are revealing. The old consensus of deference to US policy is crumbling. In Latin America, recognition is spreading rapidly. Colombia, Chile, and Brazil position themselves as champions of Palestinian sovereignty, drawing parallels between their own histories of liberation and the plight of Palestinians. Some leaders even described Gaza as the apartheid of our time, rhetoric that made Western diplomats visibly uncomfortable, but drew thunderous applause from the global South. In Africa, the response carried moral weight. Nations like South Africa, which once lived under apartheid, invoked their own painful histories. Pretoria has already taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, accusing it of genocide in Gaza, and its recognition of Palestine is framed as both legal and moral consistency.
A voice. We meet to raise our voices for peace and for justice, for the only path to ensuring security for the Middle East and beyond, the two-state solution. This year marks the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. Almost every year since, our countries have met within these halls to decry the injustice and violence of the Palestinian.
Other African nations, wary of Western dominance, lined up behind the principle of self-determination. In Asia, voices like China and Indonesia added heft. China framed recognition as essential for global security, hinting that instability in the Middle East disrupts energy flows and fuels extremism. Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim-majority country, called Palestine the litmus test of international justice. India, a long supporter of Palestinian rights, but now closer to Israel, walked a cautious line, urging negotiations while avoiding firm recognition.
These heads of state and government, His Excellency, the Secretary General, esteemed delegation members, let me greet you all with most heartfelt feelings and with kind regards. First of all, I would like to...
What we witnessed was not just a list of speeches, but a realignment of moral authority. The global South, Latin America, Africa, and Asia spoke with a unified voice that contrasted sharply with the hesitant, hedging tones of Washington's allies. The chamber became a mirror of a multipolar world, where U.S. hegemony is no longer absolute, and where smaller nations feel emboldened to defy the old order. The symbolism is powerful. When dozens of countries representing billions of people declare that Palestine is a state, the narrative of inevitability shifts.
Process and event. The question of Palestine arose when the General Assembly adopted the so-called petition plan.
Recognition creates a psychological tipping point. It tells Palestinians that they are not forgotten, and it tells Israelis that global patience is not infinite. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Recognition on its own does not create sovereignty. It does not draw borders, dismantle checkpoints, or disarm militias. Palestinian politics remain fractured. The Palestinian Authority governs parts of the West Bank, but is widely seen as corrupt and ineffective. Hamas controls Gaza with an iron grip, pursuing a strategy of armed resistance that horrifies Israel and alienates much of the West. How can a state exist when its two halves are governed by rival factions, often at war with each other? Security remains unresolved. Israel will never accept a neighbor it perceives as a permanent military threat.
Palestinians will never accept a state that exists only under the shadow of Israeli tanks and drones. Without credible security guarantees, recognition risks being a diplomatic gesture floating in mid-air, detached from realities on the ground. Economics are dire. Gaza lies in ruins. The West Bank is fragmented by checkpoints and settlements. Unemployment is staggering. Even with recognition, how does a state function when its economy is strangled and its infrastructure destroyed? Sovereignty without viability is a hollow promise. Regional politics complicate the picture. Arab leaders voice solidarity, but their priorities are often stability and self-preservation. Saudi Arabia ties recognition to U.S. weapons deals and Israeli concessions. Egypt worries about Gaza spilling instability across its border. Jordan fears a mass refugee influx. These governments support statehood in theory, but their actions are shaped by their own national interests. And finally, the United States still matters. Symbolism at the General Assembly is powerful, but the Security Council remains the crucible of real power. Washington's veto is a brick wall, and until that wall cracks, Palestine will remain outside the full machinery of UN membership. So the reality check is sobering. Recognition is a milestone, not a finish line. It creates momentum, but it does not guarantee results. It is both a victory and a challenge, both a declaration of justice and a reminder of the immense work that remains. History is rarely written in neat chapters. It is messy, contested, and often soaked in the blood of the innocent. Yet every once in a while, the world witnesses a moment that feels like a hinge, a turning point where the trajectory of an old conflict shifts, even if slightly, toward a new direction. The recognition of Palestinian statehood at the United Nations may not redraw maps tomorrow, but it has redrawn the moral landscape today. For decades, Palestinians were told their statehood was a dream deferred, a bargaining chip, a goal always promised but never delivered. Now, dozens of governments have said, no, it is a right, here, now, and not at the mercy of endless negotiations. But recognition also places a burden on Palestinians themselves. If you are to be treated as a state, you must rise to the demands of statehood. That means forging unity between Gaza and the West Bank. It means reforming institutions so they serve the people, not the elites. It means proving that sovereignty is not just a slogan, but a system of governance capable of delivering dignity, security, and hope. For Israel, the writing on the wall is clear. The strategy of indefinite occupation is unsustainable. The world is losing patience. Even allies are growing uneasy. If Israel continues to rely solely on military power while rejecting political compromise, it risks isolation, not security. For the United States, this moment is a test of credibility. Can Washington continue to champion democracy abroad while vetoing self-determination for Palestinians? Can it sustain its global leadership if it remains the lone obstacle against an overwhelming majority of nations? The Chamber of the United Nations has seen countless speeches fade into oblivion. But this week, something different happened. The applause was not just polite diplomacy, it was defiance. It was solidarity. It was a reminder that the moral arc of history, though agonizingly slow, still bends toward justice. And so the question is not whether Palestine will be recognized as a state. That question is already being answered. The question is when and under what conditions, and whether recognition will translate into real sovereignty for real people on real ground. 30 years from now, historians may look back on this week as the moment the tide began to turn, not the conclusion of the conflict, but the spark of a new chapter. Because in that chamber, as flags waved and voices rose, the world sent a message that could not be silenced. A people denied for generations will not remain invisible forever. The debate is not over. It is only beginning. And history is watching.